There's a company that knows more about you than Google or Facebook. It was funded by the CIA. Its first customer was the CIA. It built the data integration systems that track suspected terrorists, immigrants, and American citizens. It predicts who will commit crimes before they happen. It helps police departments decide which neighborhoods to patrol. And it's run by a libertarian billionaire who believes democracy is incompatible with freedom, and a CEO who says their technology will fundamentally reshape how governments operate. The company is called Palantir. They named it after the all-seeing eye from Lord of the Rings. And if you're not concerned about what they're building, you should be. Because this isn't some dystopian future. This is happening right now. Here's what Palantir does, who runs it, and why their vision of the future should terrify you. Palantir Technologies was founded in 2003 by Peter Thiel, the billionaire who co-founded PayPal and was Facebook's first major investor. Thiel had a vision: build software that could integrate massive amounts of data from different sources and find patterns that humans couldn't see. After the September 11th attacks, he saw an opportunity. Intelligence agencies were drowning in data, but couldn't connect the dots. Palantir would be the solution. But Palantir didn't start with venture capital money. It started with CIA money. In 2004, the CIA's venture capital arm, In-Q-Tel, became Palantir's first major investor. In-Q-Tel was created specifically to fund technology that serves intelligence agency needs. They don't invest in companies randomly. They invest in companies building tools the CIA wants to use. Palantir's first customer was the CIA. Their product was designed from day one to serve intelligence agency surveillance needs. Here's what Palantir's software does. It takes data from multiple sources, data that normally don't talk to each other, and integrates them into a single searchable platform. Government databases, financial records, social media posts, travel records, phone metadata, license plate readers, facial recognition systems, everything. Palantir's software pulls it all together and lets analysts search across all of it simultaneously, finding connections and patterns. The platform is called Palantir Gotham. That name should tell you something about their self-image. It's used by the CIA, FBI, NSA, Department of Defense, and dozens of other government agencies. The exact capabilities are classified, but we know from contract documents and whistleblower accounts that it integrates surveillance data on a massive scale. One analyst can query information about a person and see everything: their financial transactions, travel history, social connections, communications metadata, all in one interface. For law enforcement, Palantir created a platform called Palantir Foundry. It's marketed as data integration for businesses, but police departments use it too. It pulls together arrest records, gang databases, social media monitoring, license plate reader data, and predictive algorithms. The software can identify networks of people connected by proximity, communications, or relationships. If you've ever been arrested with someone, live near someone in a gang database, or have mutual social media connections, Palantir can map those relationships. And here's where it gets dystopian. Palantir partners with police departments on predictive policing programs. The software analyzes historical crime data and predicts where crimes are likely to occur and who is likely to commit them. Police departments use these predictions to decide where to patrol and who to investigate. It's pre-crime, exactly like Minority Report, except it's real, and it's happening in American cities right now. The company is deliberately secretive. They don't market publicly. They don't sell to just anyone. They choose their clients, mostly government agencies, intelligence services, military, large corporations, financial institutions. They operate on long-term contracts worth hundreds of millions of dollars. The Los Angeles Police Department paid Palantir millions. Immigration and Customs Enforcement paid Palantir millions. The Army, Navy, and Air Force all have contracts. The exact terms are usually confidential. Now let's talk about who runs this company. Peter Thiel is the chairman and largest shareholder. Thiel is a self-described libertarian who has said that he no longer believes freedom and democracy are compatible. In a 2009 essay, He wrote that the extension of voting rights to women had rendered the notion of capitalist democracy into an oxymoron. He's funded seasteading projects to create floating cities outside government jurisdiction. He's funded life extension research because he doesn't want to die. And he believes Silicon Valley should build technologies that reshape society whether governments approve or not. Thiel has also been a major political donor and power broker. He gave a speech at the Republican National Convention supporting Donald Trump. He served on Trump's transition team. He's funded candidates who share his libertarian vision of weakened government and unrestricted capitalism. And he controls a surveillance technology company with contracts throughout the US government and military. Think about that combination for a moment. A billionaire who doesn't believe in democratic governance, who thinks voting rights should be restricted, who wants to build autonomous zones outside government control, and who runs a company that gives governments unprecedented surveillance power. The CEO is Alex Karp, a philosopher who got a PhD studying Habermas and Adorno, then somehow ended up running a surveillance company. Karp has given interviews where he talks about technology reshaping society in ways that bypass democratic processes. He said that Palantir's software represents a new form of governance, one based on algorithms and data, rather than traditional institutions. He describes it as inevitable progress, the future of how societies will be organized. In a 2020 interview, Karp said, "We have to make products that are so powerful that the customer has to have them, and then we have to think about the ethics later." That's not taken out of context. He's describing a philosophy of building powerful tools first and worrying about consequences afterward. He's also said that Palantir sees itself as defending the West against authoritarian regimes, but they've been less clear about what happens when Western governments use these tools for authoritarian purposes. And that's the fundamental problem with Palantir. They've built infrastructure for a surveillance state and handed it to governments and police departments without meaningful oversight or accountability. There are no public audits of how the software is used. There are no transparency reports. When journalists or activists file Freedom of Information Act requests about Palantir contracts, the details are almost always redacted. We know they have the contracts. We mostly don't know what the contracts allow them to do. The company has faced internal dissent. In 2019, hundreds of Palantir employees signed a letter protesting the company's contracts with immigration and customs enforcement. ICE uses Palantir software to track and arrest undocumented immigrants. The software integrates data from multiple agencies, making it easier to find people and their family members. Employees argued this facilitated deportations and family separations. Some resigned in protest. The company kept the contracts. Investigative reports revealed that ICE used Palantir software to plan workplace raids. The system would identify targets, map their social networks, predict where they'd be, and coordinate multi-agency operations. From the government's perspective, it's efficient law enforcement. From a civil liberties perspective, it's mass surveillance used to tear apart families. Palantir's software made it possible at scale. The company has also worked with authoritarian governments. While they emphasize their commitment to Western democracies, reporting has shown Palantir pursuing contracts in countries with terrible human rights records. They've pitched their software to Saudi Arabia. They've worked with the Philippines under Duterte. They've operated in countries where law enforcement means political repression. Once you've built a surveillance platform, it turns out authoritarian regimes are very interested customers. Here's what should terrify you about Palantir. They've solved the technical problem of surveillance at scale. For decades, the limiting factor on government surveillance was the inability to process and connect all the data. Agencies collected information, but it sat in separate databases that couldn't talk to each other. Palantir fixed that problem. Now all that data can be integrated, searched, and analyzed by a single user in real time. The software doesn't just track what you've done, it predicts what you might do. It identifies people who fit patterns, even if they haven't committed any crime. It maps social networks, so investigating one person means surveilling everyone they're connected to. It enables the kind of comprehensive surveillance that totalitarian governments have always wanted, but never had the technology to implement. And Palantir is selling it to anyone with enough money and legal authority. There are no meaningful legal constraints on how this technology is used domestically. The Fourth Amendment prohibits unreasonable searches, but courts have been slow to address how constitutional protections apply to algorithmic surveillance. There's no federal law requiring transparency and predictive policing. There's no audit process to determine if Palantir's systems produce racially biased results. There's no independent oversight of how intelligence agencies use the platform. Palantir's defense is that they're just providing tools, and it's up to their clients to use them responsibly. That's the same argument gun manufacturers use. We just make the product. How you use it is your responsibility. But when you deliberately build a surveillance platform for intelligence agencies, when your first funder and first customer is the CIA, when your software is designed specifically to enable mass data integration for tracking people, you can't claim neutrality. You built it for this purpose. The company has also argued that their technology helps catch terrorists and serious criminals, which is true. Intelligence agencies have used Palantir to track terrorist networks. Law enforcement has used it to solve murders and break up drug trafficking operations. The software works for its intended purpose, but that's exactly the problem. It works too well. It gives governments capabilities that no democratic society has agreed they should have. And this is where Peter Thiel's philosophy becomes important. Thiel doesn't believe in asking permission. He believes in building technology that changes the world and letting society adapt afterward. He said that innovation requires operating outside normal rules and regulations. He's funded companies that deliberately disrupted regulated industries. That works fine when you're building a payments platform or a social network. It's terrifying when you're building surveillance infrastructure for governments. Alex Karp has echoed this view. He's described Palantir's mission as building tools that are so powerful that institutions have no choice but to use them, regardless of ethical concerns. In his worldview, the technology itself drives change. Ethics and oversight are afterthoughts, things you figure out once the tool is already embedded in society and can't be removed. That's not how democratic governance is supposed to work. In a democracy, societies decide what powers they want their government to have, and then build systems with appropriate checks and balances. Palantir did the opposite. They built the most powerful surveillance infrastructure ever created, sold it to governments and police departments, and now we're supposed to figure out the rules after the fact. But once institutions are dependent on these systems, once they've integrated them into operations, once they've signed long-term contracts, you can't easily roll back that power. The scope of Palantir's contracts is staggering. The Department of Defense has paid them over $1 billion. The Army uses Palantir software to coordinate operations and intelligence. The Navy uses it for shipbuilding program management and operational planning. The Air Force uses it for predictive maintenance and mission planning. Health and Human Services used Palantir software during the COVID pandemic. The CDC used it for tracking outbreaks. State and local governments have contracts for everything from fraud detection to child welfare systems. This isn't just about surveillance anymore. Palantir is becoming infrastructure. Government agencies are building critical operations on top of Palantir's platforms. Once that happens, removing the software means disrupting essential government functions. Palantir becomes indispensable, which means they have leverage over their clients, which means their vision of how these tools should be used becomes increasingly difficult to challenge. And what is that vision? Based on Thiel and Karp's statements, it's a world where algorithmic systems make decisions that used to require democratic deliberation. It's predictive policing, deciding who gets investigated based on statistical patterns rather than probable cause. It's government agencies operating with unprecedented information integration with minimal transparency or oversight. It's a future where technology companies like Palantir, not elected officials or the public, determine the boundaries of acceptable surveillance. The company went public in 2020, which means they now have fiduciary duties to shareholders. That creates pressure to grow revenue, which means more contracts, broader applications, expanded capabilities. As they add features and clients, the surveillance infrastructure becomes more comprehensive, and there's no mechanism to stop it, no regulatory framework, no public debate before deployment, just continuous expansion of capabilities sold to institutions with legal authority to use force. There have been attempts at accountability, activists have protested Palantir, journalists have investigated their contracts, some employees have resigned. But the company keeps growing. Their stock price went up. Their contract pipeline is full. They've expanded internationally. They're not just working with the US government anymore. They're building surveillance infrastructure for governments around the world. Every authoritarian impulse, every government that wants to track dissidents or control populations now has access to technology that makes that possible at scale. Here's the core question. Should a private company, funded by intelligence agencies, run by people who are skeptical of democratic governance, be building and selling surveillance infrastructure to governments with minimal public oversight? Because that's what's happening. Palantir is a CIA-backed venture that became a multi-billion-dollar company by selling surveillance tools to governments, police departments, and corporations. The people running it believe they're making the world more efficient and safer. But they're also building the technological foundation for a surveillance state. And once that infrastructure exists, once governments are dependent on it, once it's integrated into everything from immigration enforcement to military operations to pandemic response, you can't easily dismantle it. The capabilities remain. Future administrations inherit them. Future leaders, whoever they are, whatever their intentions, have access to unprecedented tools for tracking, predicting, and controlling populations. That's what Peter Thiel and Alex Karp have built. Not just a software company, infrastructure for surveillance at scale. And they did it with CIA funding, under minimal oversight, guided by a philosophy that says democracy is inefficient and technology should reshape society whether people consent or not. They named their company after an all-seeing eye. They weren't being ironic. They were telling you exactly what they intended to build. If you're not concerned about Palantir, you should be. Not because they're doing anything illegal. They're not. Everything they're doing is legal. That's the problem. The law hasn't caught up to what's now technologically possible. And by the time it does, Palantir's software will be so deeply embedded in government operations that removing it would be nearly impossible. This is how surveillance states get built. Not through dramatic authoritarian takeovers, through quiet contracts with tech companies, through incremental expansion of capabilities, through normalization of tools that would have been unthinkable a generation ago, and through the work of people who believe they're making the world better, even as they build infrastructure that could enable the worst impulses of any future government. Palantir is real. Their software is operating right now. And unless something changes, unless there's meaningful oversight and accountability, they're building the future. The question is whether that's a future any of us actually want to live in.